Hello, welcome to Harry's Horror Books, and today I'm doing my 12 favorite books from the 1980s. As a child of the 80s, I read a hell of a lot of books back then, still read now, but the 80s horror books, the 80s slasher movies, the 80s horror movies stick with me, and that was my formative years. So, first book I'm doing is a book I literally just finished today, The Voice of the Clown by Brenda Brown Canary. Very hard book to find, very controversial. I truly enjoyed it. I'm going to make my own video review of it. But thinking about it, it's a very twisted love story that has suicide, infanticide, child abuse, dysfunctional families, and mental breakdowns of everybody within the said family. Doesn't sound like a happy book. It wasn't, but it's well written, worth a read if you can find an affordable copy. And again, I'm doing an in-depth review of this soon. Next book is Such Nice People by Sandra Scapatone. Another book I read a few months ago. Another 1980s dysfunctional family book. Was very enjoyable. It's what I consider a quiet horror book. It doesn't have a lot of fluff. Doesn't have a lot of subplots and tangents going on. It's a pretty straightforward story. Really quick from the back. Tom Nash, president of the senior class, captain of the basketball team. Life was opening its arms before him, but Tom could only think of death. As Christmas drew closer and his relatives made their holiday plans, Tom, tormented by voices in his head, made his own plans to murder his whole family. And that's what the book is about, his descent into madness. Kind of makes you wonder, did it really happen or was it all in his head? But again, very well written, very worth hunting down. If you have a copy, I would recommend reading it. Next up is Dean Koontz' Phantoms, my favorite book by Koontz. I read this when it was new, 1983 it came out. I believe my mom had a hardcover initially. She loved Koontz, so I read all the Koontz from the 70s up until the early 90s. This book's about a quote-unquote a phantom who makes a small town in California disappear. Everyone's dead. They kind of link this monster to Roanoke and other lost civilizations. Some minor H.P. Lovecraft-ish stuff thrown in. But it's a well-written book. It's like a roller coaster ride. You know, early Koontz, this era of Koontz was, in my opinion, his peak. He could write his ass off at this point, and I said loved all his books from the mid to the end of the 1980s. Next is a book we all know very well, Silence of the Lambs, Thomas Harris. This came out in 1988. I read Red Dragon when it came out too, which I believe was 81. I was 13 at that point, so it didn't make as much impact on me as reading this when I was a 20-year-old. But I remember the story in this is I bought this at a bookstore in the Boulevard Mall in suburb of Buffalo, New York. Walked home, which was about an hour plus, including walking over railroad tracks down a little path to go to my street. And I read this book as I walked. Couldn't put it down, went home and finished it. 1991, I think the movie came out, and the movie was just as good as the book, which is a rarity, especially in the horror genre. But Silence of the Lambs, great book, worth a reread. Next is Borderlands 1 Anthology. Technically, it came out in January of 1990, so it's not the 80s, but this is a powerful, powerful short story anthology. That some stories in here just move me. The Carl Edward Wagner story, You Will Never Follow Me. 7 pages. When I read this about a year ago, halfway through that 7-page short story, I had to stop, think about it, process it, and begrudgingly go back to it because I knew what was going to happen, and it was soul crushing. But again, he could write his ass off as well. This is a well curated collection. Stories with Harlan Ellison, Chet Williamson, Poppy Z. Bright, T.E.D. Klein. Let's see who else is in there. Every story in here kicked my ass. It was so good. You have John Shirley, Michael Green, Bentley Little, Nancy Holder, David Silva, and more. Les Daniels, Elizabeth Massey, Charles Grant, G. Wayne Miller. All these people we've read numerous books from them, short stories. And again, The First Borderlands, great, great book. Next we have, there's 7 more books left, which are all vampire books. I realized a couple years ago when I got really back into rereading horror that my favorite genre is the vampire book. Don't know why. I wonder if it's because vampires are more than human. I've looked at myself as more than human sometimes, so I wonder if there's just some weird parallel where, like, hey, they're metahumans and so am I. But anyway, first one is The Light at the End by John Skip and Craig Spector. Vampires in the underground New York City subways. This came out in mid-'80s. So I read it before I moved to New York City. But when I moved out to the city, it was refreshing to put locations to stories I've read set in New York City, not knowing anything about the geography, the location, or anything about it. Once I moved out here, it was nice to okay, this is what the subways are. This is what the tunnels look like. These are where these abandoned shafts go. Story starts off, a bunch of people are being murdered underground. No one knows what's going on. Turns out there's a vampire colony living in the New York City subway tunnels. Great book. These 2 authors are some of the founding fathers of the splatterpunk movement. Other books they've written, The Bridge, etc., are great reads. They both are really good writers. Their books are very well written. They don't plod down with unnecessary BS, and you kind of forward to the end because you want to see where it's going. Again, The Light at the End, great book. Another great book, also set in New York City, Live Girls by Ray Garton. This is a 1991 reprint, but I had the original, read that. Again, set in the New York City, sleazy Times Square area. Stories about a guy who loses his job. I forget if he got fired or quits. His girlfriend leaves him. He starts hanging around the peep shows and sex shops of Times Square. Turns out one of them is run and populated with female vampires. Long story short, it's a nice time capsule of the mid-1980s Times Square, New York City, where I wasn't here then, which is an era I would have loved to be around, more for the horror movies that were running there instead of all the sex shows. But ultimately, the main character wants to be converted to a vampire and gets his wish. But again, Ray Garton's another splatterpunk style author, wrote some really wicked stuff and worth hunting down. Next is The Delicate Dependency by Michael Talbot. This is another example of a quiet horror book. The only vampire book I have read to my knowledge where there's not a lot of vampire killings. This story is more about a doctor in the book who accidentally hits the vampire and is amazed that, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but the vampire doesn't seem to age and heals really quickly. So he's looking himself for keys of immortality and a way to make people live longer, and he starts to figure out what he can do to figure out how to make people live longer without them becoming a vampire. I'm probably misremembering a little bit about this, but again, it's a great book. The author died young. He wrote a couple other books, but he died, if I remember, very early 90s, late 1980s. It's a shame because, he had a gift of writing. And this is one of my prime examples of a quiet horror story. Just the opposite of a quiet horror story is Vampire Junction by S.P. Samtow. This book is like a 1980s MTV video come to life. It's got a herky-jerky style of writing, which just rushes from one thing to another, but somehow it works. You don't get lost with all this hyper cutting. It's literally like watching a video come to life, which made sense. It came out, I believe, in the mid 80s. Yep, 84, 85, this came out. Stories about a vampire who, in his current form, is a teenage pop star who is traveling the world doing concerts and drinking blood where he's going. Ultimately, he wants to make a little town with victims that he could drain, or people who want to willingly be there with him. Hence, the city is called Vampire Junction. Great book. Well worth the read as well. Said these books have a reputation for a reason, and said I thoroughly enjoyed it and looking forward to reading more by him. Another classic, Fever Dream by George R.R. Martin, which everybody knows from Game of Thrones. This is a vampire novel that takes place on a river boat in the 1850s up and down the Mississippi River. The main character is a character named Abner who builds his dream steamboat, and he makes money by shuttling passengers from point A to point B. Turns out he's shuttling vampires who are draining people everywhere they get off. Not a criticism. I wish it was a bigger book. Abner's character is really well defined, and there's some missing years in this book, which I would have loved to have known. George R.R. Martin wrote a standalone book with the character Abner and his missing years, but well written. It's a great story set in a historical period of America. There's some segues and metaphoric issues to slavery, where the vampires are killing enslaved people more than regular people. Not regular, you know what I mean. Enslaved people more than white people, because they would be misled. So it's an easy meal for vampires who know what the vampires are. But anyway, great book, well worth getting. Finally, we have The Necroscope by Brian Lumley. This is my mom's copy. I've read almost all the Necroscope books. I don't know how many came out after the year, like 2005 or 6 or so, but The Necroscope is a great series. The main character shares my name, Harry Keogh. So, I like reading books that have Harry in them. Harry can do what is referred to as dead speak, mentally talk to dead people, mentally have dead people teach him languages and fighting styles, and etc., etc. And he uses these skills to help humanity by hunting vampires. A lot more goes into that than this, but the Necroscope series is phenomenal. Brian Lumley was a great writer who made his bones writing H.P. Lovecraft-inspired horror stories in the 70s. And again, Necroscope was great. Finally, we have my favorite vampire novel ever, They Thirst by Robert McCammon. This is an original paperback from 1981. I like the book so much, I have multiple copies. This is a reprint, which this is my mom's copy. This is an English version. All these English reprints of McCammon's books have this upside down cross on them, or this cross with the people hanging upside down and other images in them. And also have a signed hardcover, which I got as a gift from a friend. This one was signed in 1991. They Thirst. I read this in 1981 when it came out. It stuck with me all these years. I reread it 2 years ago, about 6 months after my mom passed, because I was trying to revisit and reconnect with her and what she liked and the imprint she left on me. McCammon was one of her favorite authors, so I read this and I was amazed at how much instantly came back to me, from the plot, characters' names, the ending of the novel, which I remembered, all these decades of how it ended because it blew my mind as a 13-year-old kid how they were able to rid this town who was infested with vampires, and with how they did it. I said it blew my mind as a 13-year-old kid. As an adult, it's a little bit less mind blowing, but for the plot of the book and what they were doing and who was involved, it still makes perfect sense. But again, They Thirst is one of my favorite vampire novels of all time. McCammon still alive, thank goodness. He could write his ass off, and this is well worth reading. I wonder, do I look like the vampire a little bit on here? I don't know if I do or not. You tell me in the comments if you think I am looking like a vampire, and am I more than human or not? Anyway, thank you for watching and listening. And if you have any suggestions on what you'd like me to review of these books, let me know in the comments below, and I will do reviews. Thank you very much.